2018 was a pretty weird year, though it will be remembered most as one where everyone felt like this.
Everything is bad now, and there's nothing I can do about it!
Also, there was more new animated content on TV and streaming than ever before, and not all of it was perfect. Even some of the better shows had duds that slipped through the cracks, and that's what I'm looking at today. The rules are the same as they were for the best list that I just finished up. Only one episode per show, no multi-parters or specials, and if I didn't watch it last year, it won't be on the list. I stress that last rule the most, because while I did go out of my way to find a few rotten entries, this list is even more personal than my best list, so it probably won't look much like yours. With all that said, let's ring in the new year with my top 10 worst cartoon episodes of 2018. As I previously stated, the DuckTales reboot is fantastic at subverting my expectations, and it did just that in the other bin of Scrooge McDuck, but not in the way that it usually intends to. At the end of the day, it does move the overall plot along, but it doesn't offer anything I haven't seen before. Webby and Lena's friendship was already tested by Lena's aunt just a couple of episodes ago, and right when this plotline seems like it's going somewhere interesting, that segment of the episode turns out to just have been a dream. What a tease for a conflict we would barely see a resolution to later down the line. The subplot here is the most generic the series can offer, as Louie is put at odds with a Bigfoot that is conning his siblings into crashing at McDuck Mansion. They spend too much time building up the tension between these two, and their subplot ends just a scene later as a result. I don't think that this is truly a bad episode. This reboot hasn't sunken that low yet, and probably won't for a long time. The other bit of Scrooge McDuck just kind of feels like an unneeded pit stop in the middle of a solid storyline, and is an adventure I wouldn't mind locking away. Step aside, Rugrats, because the Boss Baby is back in business. After the Oscar-nominated film made $500 million worldwide, the people's need for more Boss Baby content was fulfilled with 2 seasons of a new Netflix animated series. It's not only got the freshest rap theme song around, but it's also got all of the high-quality writing and storytelling that you would expect from this franchise. Just look at the episode The Constipation Situation, in which Boss Baby can't poop, so he can't do anything. If that emotional story arc is too much for you, we have cat lover and child predator in the making, Bootsy Calico, destroying baby love around the neighborhood with his dreaded copycats, who can mimic the shriek of a baby crying. Now, the sound engineer for this episode didn't seem to understand that in comedy, what annoys the characters should never annoy the audience, since he cranks those baby screams up to the point that the audio almost reaches ear-bleeding levels. To save the day, Boss Baby and his squad get a bunch of talking cat toys together to cancel out the screams, not only hurting my ears just as much as before, but also showing off an abysmal CGI effect as well. The conflict in this high-stakes episode is also resolved in an unsatisfying fashion. Boss Baby just drops his load out of nowhere, with no payoff whatsoever. For an episode with such a promising premise, The Constipation Situation was a load of shifty writing practices that only amounted to disappointment.
No.
While Sony was raising the bar for theatrical animation this year, with one of my new favorite movies of all time, Marvel Animation only continued to produce their rushed and forgettable rendition of The Web Slinger for TV. I watched all there is of the Spider-Man reboot's 2nd season, and though it is slightly more focused thus far, it still retains the problems with the art direction and story structure. They're kind of at their worst in the season's premiere episode, How I Whipped My Summer Vacation. That's barely a pun. Season 1 of this show started out with 6 shorts that detailed Spider-Man's origin story to get new viewers up to speed with the character. They kind of did the same thing with Season 2, except they lumped all the shorts together into one disjointed episode. We see Peter's attempts to have the best summer vacation ever be interrupted by evil villains doing really lame things, like Black Cat steals the prize money from a hot dog eating contest, and Hammerhead forces a pop star to perform at his kid's birthday party, who also happens to have a thick New York accent and a Kill Bill cosplay.
You ruined my birthday! You're gonna sleep with the fishes!
I know that Spider-Man is no stranger to wacky stories, but I can't take these recurring characters seriously when they pull stunts like these. The funniest segment to me is when Peter goes to a baseball game with his aunt. The stadium around them is pretty much empty.
Where is everybody?
I thought the place would be packed.
We're playing the Short Sox, so we haven't lost to in a decade. Last year, we won 47-0.
Well, that's strange. The stadium is filled in a different shot, but not this one. It's almost like they didn't have the time to draw a crowd scene. The last two shorts in this episode aren't half bad, but they either end too soon or are nothing besides setup for upcoming episodes. The title of How I Flipped My Summer Vacation is as dumb as the rest of the episode. Like most of this reboot, I enjoy it for the worst of reasons, but even I can't ignore how flawed its organization and tone is. But at least I can do this with it. I've mentioned it here or there, but now I will finally talk about Teen Titans Go on this channel in detail for the first time. And what would you know, it's not as bad as people say it is. Now I even have a pretty good movie to point people to in order to prove my point. But that's not to say that it doesn't have issues, because if episodes like Nostalgia is not a substitute for an actual story aren't anything to go by, there are clear signs that this thing is going through seasonal rot. Not only is the basis for the story the constantly used conflict of a debate between two titans over whether or not something is good, in this case the 1980s, but the movie they did only months ago had a time travel sequence heavy with 80s references. The film even went the extra mile by including real music from the Back to the Future score and soundtrack. While many of the jabs they take at the bygone decade here are super unspecific or are jokes that have already been done by the show before. Some gags like the one about 80s jerks are alright, and the background music is fittingly funky, but this episode just feels like it was written on autopilot. It feels like Mad Libs for an episode of Teen Titans Go, based on how generic the premise is for a show as off the wall as this, and the long string of references here barely qualifies as a story. But I guess I don't have the right to criticize this episode because it already calls itself out on its mistakes.
Though I thought there were some issues with this 80s adventure, the plotting felt random and everything was sort of rushed at the end.
Like so many other bad episodes of Teen Titans Go, Nostalgia is not a substitute for an actual story, crosses the line from self-awareness into lazy writing, and doesn't look back. The Simpsons replied to criticism regarding racist allegations over its side character Apu, the Indian family man and owner of the Quickie Mart convenience store, in season 29's No Good Read Goes Unpunished. The main conflict involves Marge finding it difficult to show Lisa her favorite book from when she was a child, since the book itself has become deeply racist by today's standards. After she fails to update the book while maintaining its plot, Marge has this exchange with Lisa.
Well, what am I supposed to do?
It's hard to say. Something that started decades ago and was applauded and inoffensive is now politically incorrect. What can you do?
Some things will be dealt with at a later date.
If at all.
So nothing. Their answer to the criticism towards Apu is simply to do nothing but shove disgusting, front-facing Simpsons in my face. In a conflict that has become so heavily divided online, why would they approach it head first only to give a non-answer? In the defense of the Simpsons crew, they've already tackled this topic before. Kind of. In season 27's Much Apu About Something, where after Apu's nephew Jay directly accuses him of being a stereotype, they point out that Springfield is filled with stereotypes, and no one is truly spared. Not a foolproof argument, but one that actually has a point to it. But then, less than 2 minutes later in this episode, Apu appears in a sight gag. So what was the point of even questioning his place on the show if they're not going to make an effort to change it? The Apu exchange feels like it was tacked on to fill time and attract some controversy, because otherwise, this episode is so bland. Like a lot of recent Simpsons, time is used poorly. Marge and Lisa's subplot suddenly drops off, and Bart using the art of war to trick Homer to do his bidding feels entirely phoned in. It ends with Homer channeling Ned Flanders in order to get back at Bart, and this somehow resolves the issues between them, even though Bart has been shown to have no problems at all with Ned. They don't even use this as a segue to joke about how awful Homer is at taking revenge. The episode ends here. It's almost like it shouldn't have been padded with a minute-long intro and a pointless tag. There's also a Minecon parody, because I guess the kids still think Minecon is epic, and Daniel Radcliffe is just here, because I guess he was epic at some point too. No Good Read Goes Unpunished just combines some of the worst aspects from recent Simpsons episodes in order to create something without substance that is desperate for attention. I'm not here to take sides on Apu, but as a character so important to the series, I think he deserves more closure on his status than this.
Who needs the Quickie Mart? I do.
Hey,
He's not happy at all. He lied to us through song. I hate when people do that.
The crossovers that OKKO Let's Be Heroes is involved with are usually fine fun and great tributes to Cartoon Network as a whole, but their quote-unquote crossover with Mighty Magiswords is anything but. The inclusion of Radicles in the episode is an afterthought. Literally, Prohyas brings him into the adventure to spice it up, and all Rad does is spout one-liners and reference his own show. Otherwise, this is real mediocre stuff, and proves that Mighty Magiswords has barely changed since it begun. Even with this episode being 22 minutes long instead of the typical 11, and also being the series finale of Magiswords, it maintains an irritating fast pace that gives all of its jokes very little room to breathe. There's so many sequences and characters involved here that add little to the overall plot, Rad included. This easily could have been shortened to 11 minutes if it focused on the conflict at hand instead of introducing new ideas every single minute. At the center of Let's Team Up Because We Aren't Bad Friends is a decent story about friends gathering new interests and drifting apart. But with a colossal amount of clutter and a careless crossover, this episode is too unfocused to properly tell the story it wants to, ending a forgettable series on a lousy note. But hey, at least this was the worst thing that OKKO had its hand in this year.
Ah, gee whiz, is that the sunset we're riding into?
I'm afraid so, dear Papa.
Well, we had a good run.
I spoke too soon. I give OKKO tons of credit for experimenting with story arcs and different storytelling styles in nearly every episode, but experimentation occasionally brings failure. And while there has been episodes with a problem or two, no other has been as flawed as Let's Not Be Skeletons. It's no secret that the skeleton remotes featured in this episode are a metaphor for gun control, and you can tell in how the characters constantly talk about the remotes.
Well, what about rules and regulations for when, where, and how they're used? Ban this remote from all situations where it can be abused.
That infringes on individual liberty, and I won't take responsibility.
Now, don't get me wrong. Gun control was, and still is, an incredibly important issue, especially right around the time this episode was released, and it's certainly a topic that should be openly and properly discussed with children. I say properly because Let's Not Be Skeletons is so set on spreading its anti-firearms agenda to the point where the episode becomes propaganda. I know that I'm still talking about a cartoon and probably sound completely nuts right now, but please bear with me for a moment. They barely discuss how these weapons could be used for self-defense, and focus far more closely on the negatives. I'm not saying that the positives outweigh the negatives in this debate, but more so that the episode should have remained neutral on the topic or not covered it at all. As a result of the way that the episode tries to spread this message, those in support of the skeleton remotes are either portrayed as clueless and mindless, or are demonized. The fake-out ending, where we learn that the whole situation was KO's dream, is kind of fun for how transparent it is about its message, but only makes the story feel more manipulating, as it seems to use this twist as justification for having the characters be able to act out of character. What stops me from thinking even worse of this episode is that it still feels like an episode of OKKO. The expressions and numerous pop culture references are still top-notch, though the songs featured here are kind of forgettable. But a good presentation cannot prevent Let's Not Be Skeletons from shoving its message down the viewers' throats.
Well, you know what I always say? If you're concerned with public safety, call your local congressman.
That's a great idea.
There's only one show out there that can include unauthorized cameos from Danny DeVito, Jason Alexander, and Larry David all in a row that isn't Family Guy, and it's The Adventures of Kid Danger, the cartoon created by a man who thinks that making cartoons is a break from hard work. And it shows! Even after all of the madness that was churned out here by Schneider's Bakery, the worst episode is still Texas Wieners. The episode just escalates into insanity. It begins by introducing characters called Big Dingus and his son, Little Dingus, involves a car chase with poor CGI car models, a policeman whose only joke is his whiny voice and being fat, a kid who can't stop drooling pink slime, and a pig who bites off this girl's arm.
Can't believe your pig ate my arm.
Complain, complain.
The pacing makes this episode feel more incomprehensible than it should. Every joke during the chase sequences is overlapped with another joke, and other moments that should be somewhat suspenseful are brushed over too quickly. Mark my words, someday this show will become the modern-day equivalent of the Nut Shack online, as the humor and narratives are perfectly esoteric enough to just become one big joke.
What? The David Lee Roth Bridge! It's out of order! Might as well jump.
But right now, the only joke with The Adventures of Kid Danger is that it was on the air only recently. And with Texas Wieners, I'm not sure whether to laugh or cry internally. Sometimes cartoons go out of their way to recreate the look and feel of animation from the past, and SpongeBob SquarePants attempted to do that in a recent episode. Ink Lemonade is a throwback to the days of Season 6, back when they could get away with peeling the character's skin off, making them constantly look gruesome and unappealing, and having most of the dialogue be screamed. There are approximately 4 types of jokes in this episode. A character does something weird, Patrick is uncharacteristically smart, a character is loud, and Squidward releases his bodily fluids everywhere. Rinse and repeat for 11 minutes and you got Ink Lemonade. That sounds like a recipe, but it's only a recipe for disaster. I won't fault anyone behind this episode because, like Let's Not Be Skeletons, it was born from an era of constant experimentation. This isn't the only real dud in Season 11 either. Fun Size Friends had a similarly cruel tone to it, but that was saved by some brilliant art direction. Ink Lemonade isn't comfortable to sit through both visually and humor-wise, but considering that a miserable episode or 2 is all that we've gotten from such a consistently creative season, it goes to show that SpongeBob is no longer what it was 10 years ago. I've got 2 quick honorable mentions, with the first being Mrs. Cuddles from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The series' trademark action is put aside in favor of characters making fun of Raphael or building up to an underwhelming battle with a stuffed rabbit mascot that makes this a dull experience. The second is Ruthless People from The Loud House, a show which many people recommended me episodes from, but I found all of the ones suggested to be alright, though this was the worst of the bunch, and had a repetitive story structure filled with coincidences and half the cast acting out of character. But it didn't do too much to rub me the wrong way, and I can't think of too much more to say about it. The Loud House has these small characterization problems all the time, and with an exception or 2, I don't really think that they're worth much note. But I cannot say the same about the final entry on this list. Everyone gave Free Churro from BoJack Horseman acclaim for being thoroughly entertaining in spite of its bare-bones premise. But there was another bottle episode this year that had a similar idea behind it, Send in Stewie from Family Guy. Ian McKellen guest stars as a preschool psychologist that meets with Stewie after he pushed a classmate down the stairs. What follows is a painful 25 minutes of poor attempts at humor and drama. Stewie practically talks to himself for most of the episode, and McKellen's character makes no impression on the plot, and barely bounces off of Stewie in their interactions. Unless you think that everything that comes out of Seth MacFarlane's mouth is gold, this episode is going to be hard to sit through. And speaking of MacFarlane's mouth, the big twist here is that Stewie's British accent has been fake all along.
This isn't even how I really talk. This is how I talk. The accent is nothing more than an affectation, a coat of armor to get me through the day, just an image I cultivated so I could feel special.
I suppose the reveal shows that Stewie has been living his life through a lie the whole time, but this idea isn't elaborated on much, and only seems to come up because the episode needed a way to wrap itself up. I don't want to be the person who hates on Family Guy just because it's easy to complain about, but what's disappointing about this episode is that it's painful to watch even though it avoids many of the show's common issues. There's not a single cutaway gag to be seen, or any B-plot to drive the episode away from its focus. Though the visuals still make use of the classic dramatic Family Guy camera zoom we all know and love. This was one of the most mundane episodes of any show that I can recall, hardly filled with anything that I would qualify as a funny moment. It also ends with Stewie leaping out of bed after a bad dream. It's not quite a twist, but it is the 3rd episode on this list to end with this kind of ending. Man, I know that everyone who worked on these episodes had the best intentions going in, but going through all of these to make this video was such a nightmare. I said it was such a nightmare!
Whoa! What a weird dream. Who actually watches Boss Baby back in business? All this dreaming made me hungry. I think I'm gonna grab a pickle.
He lied to us through song. I hate when people do that.